Chapter 11. A Blueprint for a Coalition of the Willing. Consider three Canadians. The first is a grain farmer in rural Saskatchewan. He votes Conservative. He has watched his local credit union close, his hospital lose 2 of its 3 doctors, and his children move to Calgary because there was no economic future within 200 kilometers of the farm. He does not think of himself as a progressive. He thinks of himself as someone who was promised something and didn't get it. The second is a registered nurse in Saskatoon. She votes NDP. She works a ward that is perpetually short-staffed, while administrators cite budget constraints she is not permitted to review. She is burning out. She does not think of herself as a radical. She thinks of herself as someone trying to deliver a service her patients were promised. The third is a small business owner in Regina, a plumbing contractor who employs 11 people. He votes Liberal, sometimes Conservative, depending on the year. He pays full corporate tax while watching competitors incorporate through holding structures he cannot afford the lawyers to replicate. He is not opposed to taxation. He is opposed to a system where the rules are different depending on whether you can pay someone to find the gaps. None of these 3 people agree on much politically. But they share something more important than a party. They share a set of broken promises. A healthcare system that was supposed to be universal and isn't. A tax system that was supposed to be fair and isn't. A set of public institutions that were supposed to be there and increasingly aren't. That shared reality is the foundation of the only coalition that can actually change these things. Not a left coalition, not a right coalition. A coalition of people who understand that the contract they believed they were living under has been quietly, persistently dishonored, and who are willing to demand it back. What a broken contract looks like. In practice, my father fell and broke his pelvis. He is in his mid-80s. He spent 3 days lying in a bed in a packed hallway at a Saskatoon hospital, waiting, without explanation, for an actual room. Not because the building had no space. There were entire wings of that hospital closed. Closed wings, unused beds, and my father in a hallway. No administrator explained why. No politician issued a statement. No formal mechanism existed for our family to object, escalate, or demand accountability. We were told, in the quiet language of institutional shrug, that this is simply how things are. My father is not a political person. He is not a union organizer or an activist. He is a man in his 80s who worked, paid taxes, and trusted the arrangement he was told existed. He was in that hallway not because the system failed randomly. He was there because wings were closed. A decision made somewhere, by someone, for reasons that were never published. While people lay waiting in corridors. That is a broken contract. And the absence of any mechanism for his family to formally name that, escalate it, and demand a response is itself a feature of the system, not a bug. The fault line is not where we were told. It is for decades we have been told the fault line in Canadian politics runs between left and right, between those who want more government and those who want less, between urban and rural, between regions and generations. That framing has been extraordinarily useful to a specific group of people. Those who benefit from the current arrangement and whose greatest vulnerability is a coalition forming against it. Because the real fault line is not political affiliation. It is not even, in the simple sense, income. It is the distinction between wealth and income. And once you see it, the left as right frame dissolves. Income is what you earn by working. It is taxed fully, immediately, and automatically before you see it. A nurse, a farmer, a plumber, a surgeon All earn income. All pay at full rates. None can defer, split, or shelter their earnings without significant restriction. Wealth is what you own. Assets, equity, property, corporate structures, investment portfolios, trusts. It grows at preferential tax rates. It can be deferred across decades. It can be split among family members, sheltered in foundations, and passed between generations with careful professional planning. The rules governing wealth were written over decades of guided drift by the people who hold it. A surgeon earning $400,000 a year has more in common with a nurse earning $80,000 than either has with a trust fund beneficiary, drawing the same $400,000 from inherited assets at half the tax rate. The surgeon and the nurse earn income. The trust beneficiary holds wealth. The system treats them very differently, and that difference is not accidental. The coalition this chapter proposes is built on that distinction. It includes conservative small business owners underbid by competitors using offshore structures. It includes rural voters of every party who watched public institutions withdraw for 30 years. It includes first-generation homeowners priced out of a market that rewards speculation over shelter. It includes high-income professionals who earn well but have no access to the compounding tools of inherited wealth. The opponent is not the wealthy person. It is the system that treats wealth differently from income, and the concentrated political influence that has kept that asymmetry intact across governments of every stripe. Power and accountability. The coalition logic. Why dispersed people must act together. Prime Minister Carney called for middle powers to act collectively because dispersed actors cannot individually match concentrated power. The same logic applies here. A grain farmer, a nurse, a plumber, and a retired teacher do not share a party. But they share a tax system that treats their earned income less favorably than accumulated wealth. They share a healthcare system strained past its obligations. They share communities that have absorbed 3 decades of guided withdrawal. Concentrated wealth has lobbyists, lawyers, think tanks, and party access. Dispersed citizens have numbers, votes, and the moral clarity of a broken promise. The only way those assets become effective is through a coalition, built not on ideology, but on the shared question of who pays and who is protected. Why this coalition is politically achievable. Now, for decades, the conditions for this coalition didn't quite exist. Broken promises were local, dispersed, deniable. Each community's loss could be explained away. Each group could be convinced that another group was the problem. That cover is gone. Healthcare degradation is no longer abstract. It is a hallway in Saskatoon, a closed wing, a 3-day wait with a broken pelvis and no explanation. Housing unaffordability is no longer a Vancouver story. It is Moose Jaw, Moncton, and Medicine Hat. The retreat of public services is no longer something that happens somewhere else. The conditions for a cross-partisan coalition exist precisely because the broken promises have become impossible to explain away. When a conservative farmer and an NDP nurse and a liberal contractor all sit in the same waiting room and none of them can get a straight answer about why the wing is closed, the ideological dividing lines stop doing the work they used to do. The political path is not to move left or right. It is to move up, past the culture war distractions, above the partisan framing, to the structural question that every party seeking government must publicly answer. Does this policy treat earned income and accumulated wealth by the same standard? If not, why not? And who has been paying the difference? What each political tradition already knows. A coalition of the willing is not a single party. It is a set of demands that every party must answer on its own terms. Each political tradition already has the internal argument it needs. It just hasn't been applied consistently. If you are a fiscal conservative or believe in free markets, you already have this argument. A tax system where capital gains, the principal residence exemption, and corporate income splitting receive preferential treatment is not a free market outcome. It is a government subsidy for wealth over work. If you believe in markets, you believe in rules that apply consistently across participants. The wealthiest Canadians are not winning in a free market. They are winning in a structured one, and the structure is government policy. Your own principles require a coherent answer to why a dollar earned from selling a home is taxed differently than a dollar earned from working. Apply them. If you are a progressive or social democrat, you already have this argument. The tools of redistribution, income tax, public services, social programs, were built in an era when wealth was less mobile and less easily structured. Updating those tools for contemporary wealth arrangements is not radical. It is maintenance. Your project cannot succeed if the tax base it depends on is systematically hollowed out by avoidance structures that are legal, routine, and entirely visible. Naming the wealth versus income problem is not class war. It is the arithmetic your own platform requires. If you are a rural or regional voter of any party, you already have this argument. You have watched credit unions close, hospitals downgrade, schools consolidate, and post offices reduce their hours. You were told each time it was market forces, fiscal responsibility, modernization, but you know it was a choice, a consistent choice made over decades that valued urban scale over rural service. Demanding minimum service floors and binding impact assessments before closures is not a partisan position. It is the position you have earned by living with the alternative. If you are a centrist or pragmatist, you already have this argument. The social contract is not a left-wing idea. It is the foundation on which stable societies function. When the gap between what citizens were promised and what they receive grows wide enough, the political consequences are unpredictable and rarely moderate. Addressing the wealth versus income asymmetry, restoring service floors, and guaranteeing healthcare access are not ambitious reforms. They are the minimum required to maintain the basic legitimacy of the governing arrangement. The pragmatic case for this coalition is identical to the moral one. The alternative is worse. 5 priorities. Any party must answer a coalition of the willing does not require agreement on everything. It requires a defined set of structural, measurable, cross-partisan demands. Questions where the answer to, "Is this fair?" is clearly no, regardless of who is asking, and where any party seeking government must provide a specific, public, accountable response. 1. Tax coherence. One standard for income and wealth, the capital gains inclusion rate, the principal residence exemption as used by serial property investors, income splitting through corporations, and the charitable donation of shares should all be subject to a single publicly answered question. Does this rule treat a dollar earned by working the same as a dollar earned by owning? If not, a government must explain in writing why the difference is justified. And that explanation must be reviewed by an independent body every 5 years. This is not a call to punish investment. It is a call for coherence. 2. Healthcare. A guaranteed right with a named floor. No Canadian should lie in a hospital hallway for 3 days while wings of the same building sit closed. No Canadian should wait 18 months for a specialist in a system that offers a private parallel track to those who can pay $1,500 for an MRI. The social contract of universal health care is not a promise to deliver care eventually, to someone, somewhere. It is a guarantee of timely, equitable access, with published benchmarks, public reporting, and an independent advocate when the guarantee is broken. Any party seeking government must explain in measurable terms how it will meet that floor, not manage its erosion. 3. Public service floors. Minimum standards, not just spending levels. Rural and remote communities need binding minimum standards. For financial access, healthcare proximity, school availability, and digital connectivity, below which no government may allow conditions to fall without triggering an automatic public accountability process. Efficiency is not a sufficient justification for abandoning citizens. Closing a wing requires a public explanation. Closing a branch requires an impact assessment. And communities have a right of first refusal on the cooperative or public conversion of closing institutions before they are sold or wound down. 4. Financial literacy. The right to know the rules before the rules cost you. Every Canadian student should graduate understanding tax brackets, compound interest, credit agreements, employment contracts, and the basic architecture of how wealth is built and protected. This is not ideologically contested. No party has a principled argument against it. It is simply absent from most curricula, and that absence is a policy choice that is compounded in favor of those who already know the rules. It can be reversed. It should be mandatory nationally by the next electoral cycle. 5. Democratic transparency. Know who shapes what you read and who funds who governs you. Canadians are entitled to know who owns the media they rely on, who funds the think tanks whose research shapes legislation, and who finances the campaigns competing for their votes. Opacity in each of these areas systematically advantages those with resources to operate through intermediaries. Full public disclosure of beneficial media ownership, political donations above $250, and the funding of tax-exempt policy organizations is a foundational democratic requirement that no honest government should resist. The Canadian Social Contract. A draft. The following is a framework, not legislation, but a standard, a document that citizens, unions, municipal governments, agricultural societies, chambers of commerce, and advocacy groups of every political stripe could adopt, sign, and present to every candidate seeking their vote at every level of government. Not as a request, as the stated terms of the contract under which they are asked to govern. Article 1. Healthcare, timely, equal, and universal. Every Canadian is entitled to receive medically necessary care in a public facility within a clinically appropriate time frame, regardless of postal code, income, or the availability of a private alternative. This right is not fulfilled by the existence of a system. It is fulfilled by the delivery of care. Governments commit to: no Canadian will be placed in a hallway, corridor, or non-clinical space as a substitute for an available hospital room where wings or units of that facility are simultaneously closed due to funding or staffing constraints. Without immediate public explanation, a published restoration timeline, and accountability to that timeline. Maximum wait time benchmarks for emergency, surgical, and specialist care. Published quarterly by facility and by health region public reporting of all closed beds, wings, or services with the stated reason, the responsible authority, and the projected reopening date. an independent patient advocate with statutory authority to escalate individual cases and report systemically to a public oversight body. No expansion of private parallel services without demonstrated elimination of public wait lists in the same service category in the same region. Article 2. Tax fairness. Income and wealth by the same standard. Every Canadian is entitled to a tax system in which the rules governing wealth, capital gains, incorporation, charitable structures, trust arrangements, principal residence treatment are publicly transparent, consistently enforced, and defensible on the same principles as the rules governing employment income. Governments commit to every tax provision treating income from assets more favorably than income from labor will carry a published public rationale, reviewed by an independent body every 5 years, with findings tabled in Parliament. Annual publication of the distributional impact of all tax expenditures, broken down by income decile and wealth decile. Independent 5-year review of capital gains rates, principal residence exemption usage patterns, corporate income splitting provisions, and charitable share donation structures, full beneficial ownership transparency for all corporations, trusts, and foundations receiving public tax benefits. A formal public process for citizens and community organizations to challenge tax provisions on equity grounds. Article 3. Public services. Minimum floors for all communities. Every Canadian student is entitled to leave secondary school with the practical financial knowledge required to navigate adult economic life, including tax obligations, credit structures, employment rights, debt instruments, investment fundamentals, and the basic architecture of how wealth accumulates and how it is protected. Governments commit to financial literacy, covering tax filing, credit and debt mechanics, employment contracts, compound interest, workers' rights, and introductory investment knowledge. Will be a mandatory, assessed component of secondary education in every province, delivered from a curriculum developed with consumer advocates rather than financial industry representatives. A national minimum financial literacy curriculum framework, with federal funding for teacher training and materials. Annual public reporting on financial literacy outcomes by province and school district, with results disaggregated by income quintile of the student's home postal code. A formal prohibition on financial industry representation on any committee setting the financial literacy curriculum. Article 5. Democratic transparency. The right to know who shapes the rules. Every Canadian is entitled to know who owns the media they consume, who funds the organizations that shape public policy, and who finances the political campaigns competing for their vote. Opacity in these areas is not neutral. It is structural power operating without visibility. Governments commit to full beneficial ownership disclosure for all media organizations with national or regional reach, all registered lobbying organizations, all political donations above $250, and all think tanks or policy organizations receiving tax-exempt charitable status. A public, searchable, annually updated beneficial ownership registry for all media companies operating in Canada with a national or regional audience. Real-time public disclosure of all federal and provincial political donations and third-party election advertising expenditures. Mandatory annual public disclosure for any organization receiving charitable registration status that produces or funds research intended to influence public policy or legislation. A formal conflict of interest review process for any regulatory or legislative body, with members drawn from industries they oversee. How to use this contract. A social contract without a mechanism is a wish list. Here is how this one becomes a tool with edges. At election time, Print the 5 articles. Send them to every candidate in your riding, federal, provincial, municipal. Request a written response within 2 weeks. Publish every response and every non-response. Vote on the basis of specific commitments, not general sentiment. Tell people why. At the community level, bring the contract to your union local, agricultural society, ratepayer association, chamber of commerce, faith community, or school council. Ask for an endorsement. Coalitions do not have to be national to be powerful. They have to be organized. An endorsed contract in 30 ridings changes what candidates calculate. When the contract is broken, name it with precision. Not the healthcare system is failing, but Royal University Hospital had wings closed while my father lay in a hallway for 3 days with a broken pelvis. No explanation was given. No timeline for reopening was published. No politician has been held accountable. Across party lines, find the person in your community who votes differently than you do, but who agrees that a broken pelvis should not mean 3 days in a hallway. That a family farm should not be taxed differently than a hedge fund. That a child in rural Saskatchewan deserves the same financial education as a child in North Toronto. Start there. The coalition is built one shared grievance at a time, not one ideology at a time. The coalition was already in that hallway. Go back to Royal University Hospital. Go back to the hallway. My father was not the only one there. There were others, people of different ages, different backgrounds, different voting histories, lying on beds in a corridor while wings of the same building sat unused. None of them chose to be there. All of them had paid, over decades of working lives, for the promise that they wouldn't have to be. That hallway was a cross-section of the coalition this chapter is describing. Conservative voters and NDP voters and people who have never voted at all, lying in the same corridor, sharing the same broken promise, with the same absence of explanation and the same absence of recourse. They did not know they were a coalition. They had no mechanism to become one. The system, in this as in so much else, depends on people experiencing their grievances individually, in isolation, without a common language or a shared demand. This chapter is an attempt to give them that language. This contract is an attempt to give them that demand. The coalition of the willing already exists. It is in every hallway, every closed credit union, every school without a financial literacy course, every farm family watching their community hollow out, while the tax system treats $1 from selling land more favorably than $1 from working it. It is scattered. It is unorganized. It does not yet know its own size. This is the invitation to find each other.